Continuum, mother and son, artist and author. 20 years of collaboration between Clarice Smith and David Bruce Smith. The concept for the show arrived on a cold and snowy evening in February 2010. For more than a year, I had been working closely with the sculptor Ivan Schwartz on the exhibition Abraham Lincoln, One Man, Two Views, Studio Ice, and the Art of Visual Storytelling. The bronze sculptures of Abraham Lincoln featured in that show had been commissioned by Robert H. Smith, a well-known DC businessman, philanthropist, and patron of the arts. I first met David Bruce Smith, Robert H. Smith's son, at the private opening reception for the Lincoln exhibition. Our conversation quickly turned to David's mother and her extensive background in the arts as an art professor and well-known and respected visual artist. Within minutes of our first meeting, as David told me about their work together, the extent of his collaborations with his mother became clear. The thought of a mother and son working so seamlessly together over a period of more than 20 years seemed like the perfect segue from the Lincoln exhibition to a new show about the artistic process. And so over the course of a few more conversations, David Bruce Smith and I came up with the idea of organizing an exhibition at Montgomery College focusing on his book collaborations with his mother. This exhibition, exploring 4 of their creative book projects together, Afternoon Tea with Mom, Continuum, 3 Miles from Providence, a tale of Abraham Lincoln and the soldier's home, and Tennessee, is a result of that conversation. Hi, my name is Amy Gamar, and I'm Acting Instructional Dean for Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Montgomery College's Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus. Clarice Smith and David Bruce Smith share a very unique and touching mother and son artistic relationship. I, along with Montgomery College, am proud to celebrate their creative partnership with Continuum, mother and son artist and author, at the college's newest art gallery in our brand new Cultural Arts Center, located in Silver Spring, Maryland, at the intersection of Georgia Avenue and King Street. I recently had the opportunity to visit Clarice Smith's home in Crystal City, Virginia, to interview her and her son David about their work together. I also had the opportunity to have a personalized tour of Clarice Smith's art studio and to talk with her in person about her paintings, her technique, and her artistic training. I'd like to start our interview today by asking you both how you first began collaborating. As I recall, David mentioned that the book that he wrote, Afternoon Tea with Mom, was a surprise birthday present for Clarice, and it dates back to 1987, so that would be 23 years ago. It's interesting to note that in your intro to Afternoon Tea with Mom, you talked about how you really wanted to highlight her career as a successful artist.
Right.
And I'm just interested in hearing the story about how that book came to be and how you integrated her paintings with your text.
The idea was originally came from 2 friends of mine. I changed the format, I changed the design, and I went to my mother and I told her that I was doing a photo album of my favorite of her paintings and put it together. That's how I got my text. I mean, there were certain things that were missing. I couldn't get, there was no transparency of the cover shot, Afternoon Tea, so I had to call the owners of that and get people in to photograph that. And then there's a picture of my father that I took in Vienna, that's called Legs, of him standing in front of the mirror, shaving. And I had to have somebody...
Oh, I want to hear the story of that one.
Well, everybody recognizes him from the back, and I get a little annoyed. How do they know that it's Mr. Smith in his underwear at the sink?
Because he had great legs.
He did. He had gorgeous legs. But what was so great, this was in the Imperial Hotel in Vienna. And the bathroom was just gorgeous, this old world Viennese with the black and white tile and the black and white on the wall. And he was wearing white underwear and he had black hair and it just
Did you take a photograph of it, or how did you remember it?
I did both. I took a photograph, I did a sketch.
Well, in the text it says, there was a little, little discussion about who really took the photograph.
Right.
Me or her.
And you wrote the text, right? That goes along with all the
yeah, I wrote the text.
Yeah.
But the part of the text is who took the photograph?
Oh,
me or my mother. Yeah. But so I had to get somebody to take that picture. I had to get somebody to the farm when they weren't there to take it. So there were, a few technical things I had to figure out, since my father wasn't in on this either.
Okay. Can you also tell me a little bit about the cover shot there? Where is that?
This is the Hotel Maurice in Paris.
Okay. And is somebody in the family in that shot?
No,
or
it's just, I think I saw a black and white ad or something like that for the room, they're advertising, and it just appealed to me, and I made my own version of this.
I love it. It's really lush and
it's one of my favorite paintings.
But then David brought that book. We were already spending the weekends in Upperville, and we would go to a restaurant very often on Saturday night, and David met us at the restaurant for dinner. It was just Bob and me, and it was my birthday. It was my 55th birthday, and David had delivered these books to the restaurant before dinner. And then when we came, he pretended as if he had just gotten there. And at dinner, he presents me with this book as a birthday present.
That's wonderful.
So it was really wonderful. And I tell you, it started my people recognizing me in Washington, in the Washington area. And every mother got angry at her child because why didn't they do something like that for them?
It is.
So it was
gift.
very nice.
Acropolis. Imagine walking up the steps of the Acropolis, hot and breathless, people roping themselves about you. Glancing up at the columns of the Acropolis, the height seems unconquerable. Perhaps the climb to the top cannot be made. Orient Express. My mother and Michelle used to travel together for 1 week every other year. In 1983, they took the Orient Express from Milan to Paris. Although the compartments were less glamorous than the Agatha Christie movies imply, it was a trip with nice memories. Floral patterns foreshadow the more complex designs which appear in other works. My mother told me that this was a perfect painting.
After that initial book that you wrote, so at this point it was a sort of secret collaboration because you were really using her artwork and your text. Then you actually moved into a phase where you did work together intentionally.
Right.
And I think that you said that the next one that you did was in 1989, Continuum.
Right.
Could you tell us about that?
That was for the Women's Museum. That was the first artist's book for them, and Wilhelmina Holiday, who is the founder of the museum, wanted the subject of the book to be my mother's Venetian paintings, and I was to do the text, and the book would be a fundraiser. So then my mother would do a lithograph, so that they could sell the book for a higher price, and we wanted the book to be special. So we decided rather than having the typical book, we would.
Could you tell us something about how
the cover?
The cover.
Tell how the cover. It's leather
marbleized leather. So each book, there were 100 books made, and it's the first time that had been done in 500 or 600 years. And each book was done, by hand and separately.
The marbleization.
And they're all a little bit different,
They do this
right?
on paper, but they hadn't done it on
leather.
fabric or leather for a long time. And we wanted a very sensuous cover because the paintings, there's a lot of reflections with water. And Venice it's romantic, it's menacing, and yet it's romantic, and there's something very sensual about it. So we wanted to have the cover
and we wanted it to be
a nice feel and
watery looking.
Right. And actually, you had mentioned that you thought the naturalistic elements in the Venetian paintings spoke of the work of Theodore Dreiser and Stephen Crane.
Yes,
Could
Venice
you just elaborate on that a little bit?
It's dark. It's a little sinister. You don't really know what's around the corner necessarily. And I interpreted it to be a little, sinister, I guess.
Interesting.
Well, see, these also were done in the fall. So in May, everything is bright and sunny. And in the fall, you don't have that blue sky, but the reflections are fabulous on the water. So you see Venice twice. You see it, and then you see the reflection in the water.
It's almost like it has two characters, like an ego and an alter ego or something. Well, it's so nice to be in your studio, Clarice, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about this canvas that you're currently working on.
Last year, I saw the movie Cherie, based on two of Colette's stories, and the settings were so gorgeous, especially one scene in a garden room, and I thought, oh my goodness, I would love to paint that, do my own version with that.
Right.
But the movie, it was gone, and that was it. So I was leafing through the New York Times a couple weeks later, and there was an ad for the movie. And what I want, that garden scene. So I just took that as my beginning for the composition, but doing my own thing with the flowers and so forth. And I primed this canvas with Prussian blue. Now, I never use that to prime a canvas because it's an awful color. It just takes over from every other color. But I wanted to see what would happen. So painting over it with other things, that Prussian blue still comes out, and it gives a very sort of an eerie, mysterious, something ethereal, I think that's the word, feeling.
It was 2000. I did a book about my grandfather called Conversations with Papa Charlie, and all the illustrations were done by my mother for that. In 2004, we did Tennessee. That was a book about Tennessee Williams. That was with the Shakespeare Theater.
Okay, and I'm interested in the theme of Tennessee Williams for a second. Just what drew you to Tennessee Williams? I mean, obviously he's a great American playwright and writes in an incredibly dramatic voice, very powerful. But what for you, was there something in particular that drew you to that theme?
Well, I went on a sort of a Tennessee Williams kick, and at the same time there was a Tennessee Williams revival here. So I contacted Michael Kahn, who's the artistic director at the Shakespeare Theater, through somebody who knew him, and asked him if he would be interested in doing a book on Tennessee Williams, who he knew, and he agreed. And so we did 3 plays. We bound 3 plays, one of which he got for us that had never been published before. And then we did Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Glass Menagerie. Glass Menagerie. Those were the 3 bound plays with the 3 bound prints that my mother did.
And she did of the leading ladies, right?
And then the 3 unbound prints or drawings that she did were Summer and Smoke, A Streetcar Named Desire, and Night of the Iguana. And then Michael did the preface, and then I did an interview that was
a fictitious one.
A fictitious interview with Tennessee.
That must have been fun to do.
Yeah.
Because he was really a character, right? I mean, he was a very colorful person, probably not unlike the characters in his plays.
But in that interview, I mean, if I'm, as myself, the reporter, I had to sound like a Yankee. As Tennessee, I had to sound like a Southerner.
David's very good at that, the dialogue, when he did the Lincoln book.
Let's talk about the Lincoln one next. 3 Miles from Providence, A Tale of Abraham Lincoln and the Soldier's Home.
Right.
And interestingly enough, also your father later on would do the beautiful sculpture there of Abraham Lincoln standing with his horse Bob. But tell us about that particular book.
That book came about because my parents and I and 2 people from the National Trust went to Springfield. We went to the museum there, and I heard, as part of a conversation, that they had nothing to promote the cottage with. So I thought, well, maybe they could use a book. So I asked my father the next day if he thought, maybe they would be receptive to having a book written, around it, since this cottage was going to be re-inaugurated in 2008. It was then 2006, November of 2006, October of 2006. And he said, well, I think it's a good idea. Why don't you call them? And I went and I saw them, and they liked the idea. But there was something else they told us, which was that Lincoln is the most written about person in the history of the world other than Christ.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
That means I had to figure out what could I say that
hasn't been said.
Yes.
Or how could maybe I could say something in a different way that was a little more original, or a little more original than some.
And so you ended up doing something like 7 generations, and you used different fonts, and or was it 8 generations?
Right.
And it's a story that continues over how many years? 150 or something?
Let's see, it starts in 1861 to 220.
But not only did he use different fonts, he used a different language. In the
Right.
beginning, it's the Civil War soldier, his grammar, and how he would spell and pronounce words. Later on, it's his son, the language is better. Then you have the grandson, and you end up with the great-granddaughter who's emailing.
That's
So
great.
it's very clever.
It is really
the way
clever.
it's done.
I've had a chance to look at that. And the way that book is bound is really nice, too. It's done with leather, and then these ties that come around.
Well, it's meant to be like a pouch that a Civil War soldier would carry.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And what was your involvement with that particular book? Were
Just
there
doing the illustration.
illustrations?
Equally adept in the genre of portraiture, my mother has written that it is not difficult to paint a good likeness. It is difficult to paint a good picture. Someone viewing a portrait 50 years from now will not know if it looks like the sitter, but will know if it's a good painting. Like many women, my mother raised her children prior to becoming a full-fledged artist. Finally, in 1974, she enrolled in a course called Methods and Materials at George Washington University. Suddenly, 20 years of energy in the waiting commenced its upward focus. It has not ceased. Everything that has been accomplished, everything that is to be done, is in part my mother's autobiography in paint.
Could you tell us about your latest book project? A children's book on the life of John Marshall, the longest-serving Chief Justice in the Supreme Court. He dominated the court for over 3 decades and played a significant role in the development of the American legal system. But I'm curious what drew you to him as a subject, and also how did you come up with the concept of a children's book in particular?
Well, in that particular case, the John Marshall Foundation approached me about doing the book, and I told them I had never I'd never written for children, and they said it didn't really matter, and I said, well, okay, if it doesn't matter to you, I guess it doesn't matter to me. But I only have one request, that my mother is my collaborator, and that was fine, especially since they'd seen her work, and so that was it.
Great. And now this particular book is geared towards fourth grade.
Fourth graders.
And Clarice, how did you decide how to create your drawings for this particular work?
Well, thinking about his life and the different segments, he went hunting and fishing with his father. So I figured I would do an illustration of a young boy hunting or fishing. He took horseback rides and walks through the woods. So I can do something very beautiful with woods as background. It's very difficult to do an actual portrait of him because they didn't have photography in those days, and every portrait that you see is an artist's own interpretation, and there aren't 2 portraits that look alike. So what I did, there is a statue, a profile of a statue, and the beginning of the book will have a painting of the face of that statue, and then there's also going to be a portrait of his wife, Polly, and that's going to be, beginning and end. And then there'll be pictures of the Cherokee Indians. They displaced them from one state, sent them to another. So I have a picture of a Cherokee Indian on a horse with all the regalia. So it's episodes in his life that I'm illustrating.
I think it's interesting that John Marshall himself wrote a very influential biography of George Washington, a 5-volume work. And just it's interesting that your family also had commissioned back at Mount Vernon that sculpture group that's of George Washington and Martha Washington and the 2 children there, which is a really wonderful sculpture that Robert H. Smith was involved with.
That biography was commissioned by Bushrod Washington, who was George Washington's nephew, who sat on the court with John Marshall.
Amazing. Could you just tell us a little bit about your training as an artist?
Well, I had good training at GW University. They had a methods and materials course, which you really, really learn about paints and pigments. If I want to paint a mural, I know how to paint a mural. If I want to paint in fresco, I can paint in fresco. I know how to use wax method. I mean, I learned all of these methods, so it comes in handy when I decide what I want to do. I feel confident that I know what to eliminate. I know what I want to do.
Right, and a lot of it has to do with the technique, mastering the techniques.
That's right. Drawing. I mean, if you know the techniques, then you can soar and create and do things.
It gives you a lot of artistic freedom.
That's right.
So I'm interested too in learning more about your artwork, Clarice. Your writing, David. David, you wrote in the intro to Faces and Places, a show that ran at Adas Israel Synagogue in 2005, that my mother has consistently created glorious canvases, carefully honed compositions that beckon one to explore her various worlds of restful elegance. You also wrote about her versatility as an artist who can paint glorious still lifes of flowers, landscapes, as well as portraits, equestrian works, and others. Could you tell me a little bit about actually, I'll start with Clarice. If you could just comment for me about your work as an artist, all these different genres that you're painting in.
Well, I've always drawn. When I was in the first grade, if they needed an Easter bunny drawn on the blackboard, I was the one that did that. So ever since I was a kid, I've always drawn. And then over the years, I became adept at oils and pastels and so forth. And if I see it, I can draw it. So that's why I can do portraits, I can do horses, I can do flowers. I'm very lucky that way. Because it's really all a matter of shapes and form and dark and light, and it doesn't matter whether it's a horse's face or a person's face. So it's just a matter of getting mood and personality or design, whatever I think is appropriate.
I know you were saying you didn't really feel your mother had a contemporary in the literary world, but you did think that she had one in the world of movies and drama. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, her contemporary is Meryl Streep.
And why would
I'm honored.
What a great honor. Okay, so why Meryl Streep?
Because Meryl Streep is she's never the same, and she's seamlessly great.
This is a good son. He's going to have to get a good present after this.
I think so. Yeah, exactly. Consistently high quality. And you talked before, Clarice, about how when your children were young, you took them to museums and you exposed them to a lot of great art and taught them about quality and color and how to recognize beauty.
And they've come away with that. They've both grown up with a terrific sense of fashion, design, good taste.
I'm interested in which artists you most admire. Let's start from that point. The lushness and intricateness of the scenes and the quiet repose that are full of details bring to mind the American painter John Singer Sargent. But who else did you feel
all
influenced
three.
by?
I mean, I love Sargent. I love his brush strokes. Degas, I love the way he minimalizes certain things. He doesn't paint everything as it should be. I don't have any really favorite artist because I like Holbein. There's so many pieces of different artists that I like.
So anything that has quality, I think.
Right. Now, Renoir I don't care for. I mean, most of them, because they're too candy cane looking.
Interesting.
I mean,
the color palette is very pastel.
Yeah, it really bothers me. And some of the things are beautiful, but as an artist, I would not consider him on my list of favorites.
And of all your works,
Degas, I would take over.
Okay, Degas. And in terms of the works that you've done of still lifes and portraits, what for you is your favorite?
Oh well, I love
painting?
doing a portrait because it's when the shapes, I'm putting down shapes and things, and the face emerges, and it looks like that person, and it's almost as if I'm creating a miracle on paper. I love doing portraits. Her father is a violinist, and there was a concert at Maryland, and I see this girl come in, and she has this curly hair, and it was like something out of a Renaissance portrait. So I said, I would love to paint her portrait. So he told this to Danielle. Danielle told his daughter Elena, and she came to my studio, and so I did the 3 portraits of her, and I just made up the outfits and background.
And you also have used your daughter Michelle as a model for many of your portraits.
Right.
And so I wonder if you could just comment. We have quite a few beautiful portraits here. Especially, I like this one with her wearing pink.
Yes.
Could you tell us about the story of that painting?
Well, she came to our house, and she just had on a silly little dress or something, and I wanted to paint her. So I had this coat. It's a bathrobe style, and I put it over her and sat her at the bar, and everything just sort of blended in, and I call it Pink Lady because the pink bathrobe, and she's drinking a cocktail.
Yeah, and she's drinking a Pink Lady. This stunning one of this beautiful blonde woman standing in this kind of Chinese-looking outfit in front of a screen. Could you tell me about that?
Yes, I was commissioned to do her portrait, and I came to her house, and she was wearing a very ornate kimono. She collects Oriental fabrics, and it just didn't suit her. She's, blonde and so forth, so this Oriental outfit didn't go. And I said, what do you have underneath? And she had these black pajamas, and I had her put that necklace on to...
Stunning.
And in her foyer, she had this beautiful screen, so I posed her in front of that.
Do you have any favorite artists that have influenced your work too?
I think the artist who has influenced my work is my mother. Because I'll tell you what I do sometimes when I'm writing or at the computer. Sometimes and I didn't realize I was doing this until a few years ago. Sometimes when she would paint at her easel, I would stand in back of her and notice the way she was positioned in front of her painting, as if she were, I'm imagining that she's looking at her painting critically. So sometimes I back away from a computer or a pad the same way with the same picture in my mind.
Great.
That's
Does that make sense?
It does.
That's interesting.
But it gives you pause about your own approach to your work and the critical process.
Right. My mother has consistently created glorious canvases, carefully honed compositions that beckon one to explore her various worlds of restful elegance.
Could you tell me why your mother, David, is your favorite collaborator?
That's easy. Some people have chemistry, some people have love. We have both.
Continuum, Mother and Son, Artist and Author, is now showing at the Cultural Arts Center Gallery on Montgomery College's Tacoma Park, Silver Spring campus through November 12th. For more information about this exhibition, please call 240-567-1380. On behalf of Montgomery College, I'd like to thank Clarice Smith and David Bruce Smith for opening their homes and sharing information about themselves and their creative partnership for the greater benefit of the Montgomery College community and the arts community in general. I'm Amy Gamar. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you at Continuum.